Tonight, anti-vax sentiment. BC's Premier blames some politicians for the increase in measles. Police reminder. An unlocked pickup with keys inside was stolen. And glacier melt. A study from the University of Northern BC sounds the alarm. Well, good evening and thank you very much for joining us. And we begin tonight with the growing measles outbreak in Northeast BC, along with the rest of the province. The Premier is pointing the finger.
This is the sadly predictable outcome of some recklessness, frankly, on the parts of some politicians in terms of questioning vaccine safety.
Now, EB didn't name names, but with students set for the summer vacation, the Premier was blunt when he was asked about the growing measles outbreak here in BC. EB saying, quote, "Measles is no joke. It kills kids. It's preventable disease," unquote. His comments come after 17 new measles cases were identified in BC over the past week. It's substantial growth in a province that's only seen a few dozen cases all year. Health officials are bracing for a surge in cases as vacationing families hit the road and potentially fuel spread between communities. Exposure warnings from the BC Centre for Disease Control are already pointing to travel being a risk. And the Premier adding the focus for the provincial public health authorities now is to make sure British Columbians who are not protected receive full vaccination. The vaccination rate across the province was sitting at around 90% 2 years ago. That according to Dr. Brian Conway from the Vancouver Infectious Disease Centre. He says the province is now sitting around 70%, while some regions like the Northeast could be under 50%. Well, stats from the BC CDC show there are similar trends here in the Northeast. Local vaccination rates for 7-year-olds were above 90% before 2018, but they've fallen below 70% as late as 2 years ago. Northern Health telling CJDC-TV News that recently they've seen an increase in demand for the measles vaccine since the start of the current outbreak. Currently, there are 33 confirmed cases in the Northern Health region. Dawson Creek RCMP reminding the public not to leave your vehicles unlocked. A suspect was able to break into a Ford F-150 pickup. They were then able to start the vehicle because the owner left an electronic key hidden inside the truck. Well, that allowed the vehicle to be started and driven away. Police were able to locate the vehicle through the Ford's Pass app. A spike belt was deployed, but the truck kept going. It was later found near the water tower in Pouchkoupi. So far, the suspect has not been identified. Well, the BC Wildfire Service says wildfire activity continues to decrease across BC. However, areas that have received minimal rain are at an elevated risk for new fire starts. Now, there is a stretch of dry and warm conditions in the forecast this week in Northeast BC, but the service says isolated thunderstorms may also develop, particularly here in the northeast corner, where most of the current fires are located. There are about 70 fires actively burning across the province, nearly 90% of which are believed to have been started by lightning. Well, scientists are saying that BC's glaciers are not healthy and are melting at record levels. A team at the University of Northern BC found glaciers in Western Canada and in the United States are losing more than 22 gigatons of ice every year. Now, to put that in perspective, that's enough to put the entire area of Metro Toronto under 35 meters of water every year.
Glaciers are not in a healthy state. They are in what's called an imbalance with present-day climate.
Scientists are blaming the hot and dry summers. The melt is also uncovering darker ice under the surface. They say that attracts sunlight that heats glaciers even further. Well, Premier Eby is making his position clear, saying there will not be a new pipeline from Alberta to BC now, despite what the Premier of our neighboring province wants. Here's CTV's Isabella Zavarizzi.
Some of my frustration about this issue is that there is no proponent.
The Premier isn't budging, sticking to his messaging following Alberta's appeals for a new pipeline.
There is actually no project here.
Asked to elaborate on his position about the privately funded pipeline, Eby says he'd like the feds to focus on nearly $50 billion worth of projects with proponents ready to go.
that will benefit Alberta, the Yukon, and all Canadians. I strongly encourage the federal government to pay attention to those projects and help us deliver those projects that are ready to go.
Alberta Premier Danielle Smith wants a proposed energy corridor that would stretch from Churchill, Manitoba to Prince Rupert. Despite EB's dismissal, Smith is confident a private sector pipeline operator will come through and that she's weeks away from finding one.
We've been in active conversations with many pipeline companies, and I feel like we're pretty close to having either one or a consortium come forward.
EB has previously said that if Smith found a proponent and funding and assembles a project, then BC, quote, will certainly cross that bridge. Enbridge, one of Canada's biggest shippers of crude oil, saying it would explore market diversification projects provided there is demand. We will be there to build what is needed for our shippers, for Alberta, and for Canada. That's our job, our mission as a company, but only when the conditions make sense and the right framework is in place. Smith may have convinced at least one party to join her cause, but when it comes to finding an ally in BC, she has her work cut out for her. Isabella Zavarisi, CTV News, Vancouver.
As questions swirl about the future of John Roustad as the leader of the BC Conservatives, Roustad insists he's still the right man for the job. This after the party held a caucus meeting yesterday, and despite some drama within the party over the last few months, members presented a united front. A leadership review is already underway and is expected to last through the summer. Roustad was asked about a social media post from developer and prominent businessman Ryan Beatty, who is calling for the Conservatives to appeal to more centrist voters. Roustad brushed that suggestion aside. However, he did appear to show regret over a leaked letter in which he claimed that former Conservative MLAs threatened to blackmail party members.
Have to step back from those allegations in this somewhat unsatisfactory way. I think we'll follow Mr. Roustad around as whether he is to be trusted in making sound decisions at these key moments.
Premier Eby also took the opportunity to take a swipe at the party, saying, quote, no matter who's going to lead them, they're going to face significant challenges, unquote. Multiple online sources are claiming that changes are coming to traffic laws across Canada, but is it true? Well, BC police calling it online misinformation coming from disreputable websites. Sources are claiming that the speed limit in school zones would be in effect 24 hours a day starting on July the 1st. But the BC Highway Patrol says these websites are completely wrong. They say social media and AI are amplifying the misinformation online. School zones are regulated by the provinces, and they're in effect from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. unless a sign says otherwise. BC RCMP are urging the public to look at the source of the information when it comes to traffic laws. A new survey finds many Canadians don't think they need travel insurance when traveling within the country. The survey comes as several reports show more people are choosing to go on vacation within Canada this year instead of heading south. The report found that 4 in 10 Ontario residents traveled domestically without insurance during their last trip, and of those, 43% thought it was unnecessary, while nearly a quarter worried about the cost. And if you work in information, finance, and real estate industries, you're going to be happy to know that your salaries are among the professions that are outpacing inflation. And that's a good thing, considering all of our economic concerns. CTV's Andrew Johnson reports.
Ever since the pandemic led to skyrocketing inflation, many Canadians have felt like they're drowning, not getting ahead. But the numbers have been turning around. New average wages in a variety of industries were released today by Statistics Canada. Pay overall is up more than 4%, but let's take a closer look. If you work in information and culture, it's an industry that's paying people 10% more than last year. These are jobs related to the movie industry, telecommunications, publishing, and content providing. Wages in real estate and rentals are up close to 10%. Finance and insurance wages rose 8%. Education is paying 7% more, and so is forestry and logging. At the other end of the spectrum, the average wage for people who work in utilities, think electric, gas, and water, is down close to 3%. Wages in retail down a bit as well, and in wholesale. The arts, entertainment, and recreation sector also didn't keep pace with inflation. Despite Canadians on the whole making more, one economist explains why right now, for you, it may not feel like it.
The general person who may have seen reasonable wage gains since 2023, say, doesn't take that and compare it against the fact that coffee's $20 and it used to be $10 for a package. They don't compare it to the fact that butter is more expensive and beef is a lot more expensive. These are the types of calculations that economists do. We talk about real wages and whether you're gaining against inflation, but folks are upset.
He also points out this trajectory of rising wages and economic growth over the past year or two is now in serious danger thanks to the Trump and tariff factor, and the near future is very much a question mark. Andrew Johnson, CTV News, Vancouver.
Older adults in Canada are finding it increasingly difficult to access primary care. Those are the findings from a recent survey released by the Canadian Institute for Health Information. The survey says 8% of adults aged 65 and older in Canada reported not having a primary care doctor or a place that they usually go to receive primary care. The survey also looked at the mental health of older adults across Canada. It found that fewer than 31% received counseling or treatment in the past year. Among those, 38% wanted or felt they needed those services. Well, to Ottawa now, where the Senate has passed the Liberals' major project legislation. Bill C-5 gives the government the power to fast-track projects deemed to boost the national economy. It sidesteps environmental protections and other legislation. It was approved in the upper chamber today without amendments. But a handful of senators did try to persuade their colleagues to include language about respecting Indigenous rights. Several Indigenous leaders wanted the bill's passage slowed in order to give their communities more time to suggest changes and to review the legislation with their lawyers. Now, the law will come into effect when it's signed by the Governor General. A Canadian man has died in the custody of U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement. Officials with the Miami Fire Rescue Department have identified the man as 49-year-old Johnny Novello. They say he was a Canadian citizen who was arrested on May the 15th of this year for allegedly trafficking drugs. He was found unresponsive on June the 23rd at a detention center where medical staff responded, then called 911. The cause of his death is under investigation. Well, a Vancouver woman had the Canadian experience of a lifetime when she ended up face-to-face with a moose on the side of the road. Kelly Paxian and her husband were driving through Jasper National Park in June around 5:30 when they noticed a majestic animal on the side of the road. Well, the moose, as you can see there, came right up to the vehicle, even stuck its muzzle inside the open passenger window and licked the side of the car, Paxian says. She's seen moose on that road before, but never anything quite as up close and personal as this.
Just seemed to be going about his day, and knowing what we know from our previous wildlife encounters, we were just like, we are just going to remain calm as possible and let the animal control the interaction. So we just let it play out.
That is extraordinary. Paxian is a safari specialist. She spends most of her time in South Africa. Lessons learned on safari helped the couple to remember to remain calm. She says, well, this was a once-in-a-lifetime encounter. She would encourage others to roll their windows up if a moose ends up getting that close. All right, please do stay tuned. I'll be right back with a look at weather.